Welcome to Girl Read Your Bible, Sunday School for Adults Who Missed It. I'm Nicole Waltz, your host for this podcast, brought to you by 522gals.com, a website dedicated to personal development and spiritual growth. Go and check it out. And please take a minute to subscribe to this podcast. It really helps us to grow the channel and reach more people for Jesus, inspiring everyone to grow in their faith and become everything you were created to be. We are talking about extraordinary women of faith. And this week's episode is very special because we are talking about an incredible woman who was so important that she gets her entire own book of the Bible. That her story is important and relevant today, not just in the amazing takeaways that we are going to get from her life, but also because this book ends in a festival celebration called the Feast of Purim, and that is happening now. That is happening right now in Jewish culture. They are still celebrating and remembering Queen Esther and the actions and the things that she did and what took place in this incredible book. That's happening now. They're really celebrating and remembering this story. So I want you to know this story, not just because there's so many good takeaways and things we can learn from her character and her life, but also because this is something that's still brought to remembrance and still being talked about among the Jewish people and celebrated literally right now, this week. This is the Feast of Purim is happening now. So I think it's really cool to talk about and know what's going on in the world around us. And we are going to talk about Esther. And Esther gets her whole own book in the Old Testament. She's an incredible woman who has a very interesting story. So we're going to talk about it. However, Esther has 10 chapters. And so we're going to do the podcast a little bit differently today because we're going to get through the entire story of Esther. We're going to talk about a lot of important takeaways from her life, but I'm not going to just read 10 chapters to you and that like we normally do because it would take too much time. I will tell you that these 10 chapters are what I want. That's your homework for the week. I want you to read the entire book of Esther for yourself and friends. I know I said it's 10 chapters and all of that, but they're very short chapters. It's not like chapter books today. The Bible is broken up very differently. So these 10 chapters should take you maybe 30 minutes to read for yourself in your own time. And I want you to do that because there's a lot of things that you're going to get out of reading the Bible for yourself. Girl, read your Bible. But we are going to break down some of the takeaways that we can get from her story. So I'm going to give you an overview. We're going to read a little bit here and there. I'm going to tell you where those are. But please this week, read the entire story for yourself so you don't miss out on anything good that God has for you. Speaking of that, just for your knowledge and information, fun fact, the book of Esther is sometimes debated among theologians, scholars, people study the Bible, of its placement in the Bible because God, the name God is never mentioned in the book of Esther. And so that had caused some controversy about its placement in our canon, our Holy Bible, right? But I want to say that the takeaway for me is that without even being named, without even being mentioned, God's hand and God's faithfulness and God's favor and placement and activity is obvious throughout this entire book. And I think that's relevant because that's something we can see even today without having to get every bit of a mention. God's hand is always working and moving on our behalf. And that's what he did in the book of Esther. He is working to save and protect his chosen people. And friends, new covenant, new culture, that includes us today. We are part of the family of God. We are his children, and he is working to placement, favor, what looks like coincidences, divine alignment to set you up for such a time as this, that you are in the right place at the right time, even when the circumstances around you has seemed unfair and just not favorable. to find out later that you were in the exact right place at the exact right time and that you do have a purpose to fulfill. And we're going to see that throughout the story of Esther. So many good takeaways. I'm so excited to dive in. So let's just get started. Our story starts with they're laying the foundation. They're painting a picture. So it's happening in the province of Persia, and the Jewish people are living amongst the territory of Persia because of different exile and different things that's happened to them. I'm not going to get into all of that. Read the whole Bible for yourself, friends. It's really fun. But in any case, this is where they are right now. A vast majority of the Jewish people are in Persia. Now, Persia today is modern Iran, some of Iraq. You can Google this. I'm a Bible nerd. I love to Google the maps and see whether the Bible, when it's referencing a place in the Bible, what that was then versus what that is now, territory-wise, what the countries are named, because kingdoms have changed throughout the centuries. And so it is neat to see, Persia is Iran and parts of Iraq. Like, that's really interesting to see. So in any case, it starts there, and the king, Xerxes, is having a party. And friends, when they had parties back then, it was not a fun night activity. No. These parties would go on for days, and they were a hot heap and mess. In any case, a lot of people were having a lot to drink and overindulging in their finding joy, what have you. And in any case, they are a little intoxicated, probably a lot, actually. And some of the king's advisors, comrades, influencers, what have you, they're suggesting to the king, why don't you call out Queen Vashti? Because she's beautiful and we'd all like to look at her. And so, there's some innuendo happening here. And meanwhile, Queen Vashti is having her own party with the girls, like the ladies. And the king agrees. He's like, oh yeah, I'll call her out here. She's beautiful. We all want to look at her. And Queen Vashti gets this invitation, have you? And she refuses. She's like, no, I'm not doing that. I'm hosting my own party, and I'm not up for that. Vashti thinking, I'm the queen. I have I deserve respect. I am not doing all of that. And while that seems fair and true, she is the queen, but the head honcho here, friends, is the king. And what happened in that such a scenario is that the king is embarrassed because she denied his request, disrespected. And that is going to be a theme in this book, that powerful men who feel disrespected are dangerous. That's going to be a theme that we're going to see throughout the book of Esther, because the king gets upset. His advisors also suggest that he should banish her because of her disrespectfulness. Now, mind you, she's his queen, and he actually really did care for her. But out of his anger and embarrassment, he listens to them. And that's a theme we're going to see in Xerxes. He is easily subjected to influence. When the people around him give him advice, even though it is not great advice, he tends to listen. He tends to agree with them, and yep, sounds good to me. That's what we're doing. Not a deep thinker. That's what I get out of that. In any case, he does agree with them, and he does banish Vashti. And sometime later, he's reflecting on what he's done, and he's feeling kind of sad about that. And the people around him, again, his advisors, they notice, and they suggest that he have a contest, I want to call it. I want to tell you, this is the foundation laying of the first season of The Bachelor. This is where the idea had to have come from, because they decide that they're going to round up women from all over the land of Persia, from every province he oversees, some of the most beautiful women, and he is going to get to choose which one he would like to be his new bride/queen. And so this is slightly different from The Bachelor, because these women are not entering the beauty contest. They are being chosen for it. They are a little more like the Hunger Games on that side, where they have been chosen for this project. And I want to give you a full story picture, some things that were left out in Sunday school. There's pros and cons to this day and age culture. I'm not saying this is obviously not something that is a good idea, or, women didn't have the same rights, people didn't have the same rights, all of that. The women that are going to be part of this contest because that's a terrible word for it, but we're going to go with that. When I was in Sunday school, we called this here a beauty pageant, and it was so much more, so much different than that. In any case, moving on, all the women that are chosen for this will be a part of the king's harem for their lifetime. They will not be able to marry someone different or to proceed with their lives wherever they were. They won't be able to go back home, none of that. So once they are chosen for this contest, their life is definitely going to continue in the palace. So pros and cons here, though. While in a lot of cases, the women didn't really have choices about who they would marry anyway. And having a man who took care of you was pretty vital to survival for the women of this day and time in culture. So this would alleviate the concern there, I guess, where you are going to be in the palace. You will be cared for the rest of your life and, provided for. So I guess that's the pro if you're not chosen to be queen, because we've got a lot of women here and there's only going to be one bachelorette. I don't know. There's only going to be one chosen. So in any case, that's a hard thing. I think that you're getting, you're getting chosen for this. You're going to get to go to the palace. You have hopes and dreams, potentially being the queen, but that's going to be it for life. And so that's pretty rough for all of these women. And I want to point that out because I got to say that's got to be a rough call for Esther too. Because Esther is selected to be one of these women, and Esther has already had challenges in her life. The Bible tells us that she is being raised by her cousin Mordecai because her parents died when she was young, and Mordecai adopted her and loved her like his own daughter. And that is really, I think, valuable that it references that he adopted her and loved her like his own daughter, because he does show up for her continually throughout her story. And he's always checking in on her. And that's, I think, the mark of a good parent. And that's showing that he really cared for her as his own. In any case, when she is selected for this contest, he advises her, do not tell anyone of your nationality. Do not tell anyone that you're Jewish. Don't tell them about your family background or history. Just leave that alone. Because there is always, throughout history, contention for the Jews. There's always people who just despise the Jewish people and have bad intentions. So he's like, let's leave that part of your story out and just focus on the task at hand. And she agrees and listens and respects Mordecai, which shows something more about her character. But when she's chosen to go here, the Bible does break it down for us, and I think we should read it a little bit because there are some things that I find pretty intriguing here. We're gonna read a little bit from, we're in chapter 2, and we're gonna start here in verse 8. As a result of the king's decree, that's his decree for the contest, Esther, along with many other young women, was brought to the king's harem at the fortress of Susa and placed in Haggai's care. I could be pronouncing that wrong, friends. Moving on. Haggai was very impressed with Esther and treated her kindly. He quickly ordered a special menu for her and provided her with beauty treatments. He also assigned her 7 maids specially chosen from the king's palace, and he moved her and her maids to the best place in the harem. Esther had not told anyone of her nationality and family background because Mordecai had directed her not to do so, and every day Mordecai would take a walk near the courtyard of the harem to find out about Esther and what was happening to her. Before each young woman was taken to the king's bed, she was given the prescribed 12 months of beauty treatments, 6 months with oil of myrrh, followed by 6 months of special perfumes and ointments. Can we just pause here for a second? Because these girls, I know this is not an ideal situation at all, but they're immediately whisked away to a 1-year spa in the palace. I think that's something we should practice here in regular life. I think a 1-year spa getaway sounds fantastic. In any case, it's pretty incredible. That's the immediate process before you could possibly be named queen, is you have to undergo this 12 months of beauty treatments. Let's keep reading because I could go way down. I could go down a rabbit trail on that one. I think 12 months of beauty treatment sounds fabulous. We're on verse 13. When it came time for her to go to the king's palace, she was given her choice of whatever clothing or jewelry she wanted to take from the harem. And that evening she was taken to the king's private rooms, and the next morning she was brought to the second harem where the king's wives lived. And there she would be under the care of Shashgaz. I'm so sorry. I'm so bad at pronouncing these names, friends. We're just going to call this person the king's eunuch because that's who he is. And he's in charge of the concubines. And she would never go to the king again unless he had especially enjoyed her and requested her by name. This was the system. It's just giving you the information. In any case, I think it's important to talk about that Esther wins the favor of everyone in charge. We've got to take a minute to talk about this. It told us that Haggai, if I'm pronouncing that wrong, I'm sorry, was immediately taken with her. That she found the favor of this person. That they gave her special beauty, extra beauty treatments. That she got 7 handmaidens to take care of her. That she was placed in the best place in the harem. She was favored by the people in charge. Friends, Esther wasn't basic. She did not fit in with the crowd. And I want you to remember this and think on this person the next time you feel strange in the crowd. You feel a little different. You feel like you do not fit in. Maybe it's because you're extraordinary and not basic. Esther was immediately favored and looked on. And I want to think about that too, pretty regular. I try to think, what kind of a person must she have been to just walk in the room and carry such anointing and presence that she immediately wins the favor of people in charge of the room. That she is immediately captivating and that they admire her. I want to be a person who walks in that kind of favor, but it comes at a cost. Because when you walk in that kind of favor, you usually don't blend in with all the other girls in the room. And sometimes we find that place a little lonely and we're a little sad. I'm saying friendships are important. It's important to find your people. But not everybody is your people. Sometimes you stand out. Sometimes you feel different. And I just want you to be reminded that so did Esther. So did most, in fact, extraordinary women of faith. We often stand out in a crowd because you are set apart and anointed and have a far bigger purpose, because you walk with a different favor and integrity than the majority of people around you. It is wonderful, but it can be lonely and sad. And Esther could be lonely and sad. Esther could have been walking around depressed and angry and frustrated, and that would be fair. That would be fair. The girl was orphaned at a young age. Now she's chosen for this contest thing. She's in a foreign land. Her people are looked down on. She's already got tons of struggles in life. She could be focused on all of that and be walking around with an oh me, oh dear me, oh poor me attitude, whatever. She clearly didn't. She clearly didn't choose any of those emotions to lead her way. Because if she had, she wouldn't have stood out as extraordinary. Because people who walk around all woe is me are not extraordinary. They're basic. So remember that. It was fair. It was okay. Like, you could understand and sympathize with that position. She'd had hard knocks in life. She'd had a bad hand dealt to her. She'd had a lot of misfortune in her life. And yet, obviously, without it telling us, focused on the positive. Why do I know? Because she was immediately favored by people of influence around her, because she was noticeable, because she stood out from the crowd. So she must have carried a certain amount of joy and grace. Think about the extraordinary qualities of someone you know that you're like, that person always stands out in a room. What are they carrying? What are you carrying? How can you be more extraordinary and lay down the bad circumstances or the things that's weighing you down, man, when we let go of that stuff, then the light just shines. And people can see all that you have to offer. And I think that's something that Esther carried. I think she was full of grace and mercy and joy and peace and light and love, because she immediately won the favor of the people around her. She stood out. That's exceptional. Let's keep going. Let's keep moving on through Esther's story. When it was Esther's turn to go to the king, she accepted the advice of Haggai, the eunuch in charge of the harem, and she asked for nothing except for what he suggested, and she was admired by everyone who saw her. Esther was taken to King Xerxes at the royal palace in the early winter of the 7th year of his reign, and the king this says loved, but I want to go with adored, because he obviously didn't have time to fall in love with her. He adored her more than any of the other young women. He was so delighted with her that he set the royal crown on her head and declared her queen instead of Vashti. And then they had a big party, and it goes on to talk about that. And I think that is incredible. But it also goes on to tell us, please read it for yourself, that she still kept her family's nationality a secret, even though that was the direction of Mordecai, even though she was now queen and Mordecai had become a palace official. It was still, she's still going to keep that close to the chest. She wasn't over Sherry. All the things we can learn about wisdom coming from Esther. She's listening to Mordecai, who's been a positive influence, caring for her in her life. She's listening to the wise influence of someone who loves her. I can't even, friends. We have got to listen to the wise people in our lives who love us and are trying to give us good guidance. Esther sets a good example of wisdom. That's wisdom. Listening to other people. Wisdom doesn't always just come from yourself. Wisdom comes from listening to the people around you, and she does. And Mordecai is not nobody, right? He's a palace official. So you might feel like this is a safe time to let people know that you're Jewish, but they still are like, we're just not feeling like that's a good idea yet. And that's wise. That's very wise. So one day, well, Mordecai is, because it goes back and forth with the story, so it's cool because it's going to all play in together like a beautifully laid out movie here. Mordecai's at the city gates, and he overhears some of the king's guards who are talking, and they are plotting to assassinate King Xerxes, but Mordecai overhears them, and he gives the information to Queen Esther, and tells her to tell the king about it. And so she does. She reports to the king, but then she gives Mordecai the credit for that report. And then they find out that Mordecai's story is true, and those two men are impaled on a sharpened pole. And so that's going to be very relevant later. Very important. Now the Bible tells us, and I'm going to summarize for a little bit because now we're in chapter 3. And it's important because this is where the story is going to take a turn here. Sometime later, that's how it says it. Sometime later, the king now appoints a man named Haman to be his head commander, to be over all the other nobles. And Haman is a bad guy. Haman is very prideful. He's very arrogant and just over the top. Bad guy. And so everywhere that Haman goes, the crowds and the other nobles and everyone bows down before him as a sign of respect. But Mordecai refuses to bow down before Haman. And Haman cannot handle it. He is so full of rage and anger. He just cannot stand this. And then he finds out that that Mordecai is a Jew. And that immediately stirs something up into him. And it is not enough for him to just get rid of Mordecai. He wants to wipe out the entire Jewish people because of this act. See, again, powerful men who feel disrespected are dangerous. Haman is in a position of power, and he is enraged by this simple act of what he feels like is great disrespect. And really, it's crazy. Now, his people, I want to make note, it's important, and when you read it for yourself, you'll see it. the people investigate and they say, oh, we let this go because Mordecai is a Jew. That's how it words it for us. Like they realize, oh, he's Jewish, so that's why he won't bow down to you, because he only bows down to his God. It doesn't give us those details. It just tells, like, that's supposed to be implied, right? Like once they realize he's a Jew, they go to Haman and say, well, he's Jewish, so you could probably let it go. And Haman's like, oh, no, I can't let it go. And as a matter of fact, if that's how these Jews are going to be, let's get rid of all of them. And so he plots and goes before the king and says, there's these people who are plotting to kill you, and they're disrespectful to you, and they're plotting to overthrow your kingdom. And he makes this whole story. They're disrespecting the king and the king's commands, and they're bad, and we think we should get rid of all these people. What do you think, king? And again, Xerxes, without being the good overthinker that a king should be, is like, do that. That sounds, get rid of those people. That sounds like a good idea. And so he goes with some of his other people, his other advisors, whatever, and they cast lots and they like pick a day to make this decree. Those lots are called Purim, which is why it's called the Feast of Purim. Frankly, to me, I don't understand. You know, they choose a day. It's like almost a year later that they're going to have this, that this is going to happen, where they're going to they make a decree with the king's seal, and they say all the Jewish people are going to be what you can kill off any of your Jewish neighbors and whatever, and they're not allowed to raise arms against you, and you can take all their plunder. Anyone that you kill, you get their stuff, you get their wealth or whatever. And so this is essentially like bigger than the Holocaust, really. I mean, this is a big deal. There's like saying on this day, in the Bible, at times, on this day, my Bible names it as March 7th, but our calendars don't exactly line up because of changes in history. And so the Purim moves around a little bit. Jewish calendar is actually not the exact same as the U.S. calendar. And so that date moves around slightly, but it's always like early spring. In any case, they name this date of destruction and say to all the people of Persia that they have permission by the king to go and, declare war and attack these people, and they can walk away with the plunder from whomever they annihilate. And so it's very dark. It's very big deal. And Mordecai hears what's happening, and he rips his clothes and puts on burlap, and that's the outward expression of grief and what is happening. And then he goes, Esther hears that he's, sad, and this is that he's upset about something, and she sends him clothes and says, here, take care of yourself. And she's trying to be comforting to him. And he says, no, I need to tell her what's happening. And so he gives her the whole story, and he says to her, you need to go before King Xerxes and tell him what's happening and ask for this to be removed. Ask for this to be not a thing. And Esther is a little afraid to do so because the king, as she tells him, the king has not called for me in 30 days. And you're not allowed to just go before the king whenever you want. That's not the culture. That's not the law. If you appear before the king and he hasn't called on you, he could be very angry about that, and you could be put to death. If you don't just show up without an appointment or without having been called on. And so it would be very risky. That doesn't even seem big a word. She's literally going to have to risk her life to go before the king. And mind you, she's never told him her nationality. She's never told him who she is in entirety. They've never had this heart to heart. She's not even sure how devoted he really is to her because she's afraid to go, right? Like she's like, I could die. And Mordecai responds to her with a famous verse found in Esther 4, chapter 4, verse 14. This is your verse of the week, friends. Write it down. It's a verse for your life. We'll read it together. If you keep quiet at a time like this, deliverance and relief from the Jews will arise from another place, but you and your relatives will die. Who knows if perhaps you were made queen for such a time as this? I don't know if you've heard that verse before. because it's really popular. For such a time as this. And that's what we're talking about today. One of the many things we're talking about today, because that is one of the huge takeaways. We have to break down this verse. And this verse, I like actually a little bit more in some of the other versions, like the NIV. If you remain silent at this time, relief for the Jews will come from another source. But you and your relatives will die. And who knows if perhaps you were made queen for such a time as this, or perhaps you were placed here, or perhaps you were born for such a time as this. Perhaps this has all happened to you. This is huge. This is so big. First of all, I want to point out that Mordecai tells her that immediately, if you don't do this, salvation, rescue, relief, whatever version you're reading, for the Jews will come from another source. He already knows that God is going to protect them. This isn't going to happen. It might happen to some extent. There might be a war. There might be problems. There will be a rescue plan. God will rescue his people. I already know that will happen. I already trust God that deliverance for the Jews will happen. I know it. Mordecai is a man of strong faith and speaking prophecy right there. He is saying, if you keep quiet at this time, deliverance is going to happen. But you're not going to make it because you're not doing what you need to do. You're not doing what you are put in purpose for. Who knows? But that this is the reason that all of this has happened. This is the reason, going all the way back to Vashti's defiance and disrespect. And now there was this need for this beauty pageant. Oh, it's a terrible word for it, but we're moving on, friends. Need for this bachelor contest, and that you were chosen and you've been made queen. This has all happened for this cause. God has been setting you up for this place. Now, mind you, this was not an easy task. This wasn't like, yeah, that totally tracks. Yeah, I'm going to go before the king. That's definitely it. No, this was still a big risk. This was, like I told you, it was like a big deal because she's really afraid to go. We see that as the story plays out. It's not like a small task. It's a big ask. It's a big, scary thing for her. She says to him, go and gather together all the Jews of Susa and fast for me. Do not eat or drink for 3 days or nights, and my maids and I will do the same. And then, though it is against the law, I will go in and see the king. If I must die, I must die. So Mordecai went away and did everything Esther had ordered him. And that is really interesting, right? Esther is showing what kind of a person of faith, a person of God that she is, because her immediate response was to fast and pray and to ask the others to fast and pray. Why? Because they were after the heart of God. They were after God's hand because she knew the value of fasting and praying. Do we? Do you? It's such a valuable, I want to say tool, it might sound wrong to some of you for me to call it. It's just again, it's just kind of like Mordecai, like ripping his clothes in grief. It's kind of like getting baptized where you physically go and get wet and you come up a new creation, right? It's these physical expressions that rectify our soul with the Lord, right? There's something important and valuable about physical displays and physical actions that connect us on a deeper level with God. We see that throughout Scripture in many different ways, and fasting is one of them. That is denying your body food because you are seeking the will and the presence and the Spirit of God above your physical reality. And I think that is a big takeaway from the character and the person and the virtue of Esther, because her immediate response to something she's clearly afraid of is, all right, fast and pray. I'm going to order my people to fast and pray, and you're going to ask everybody else to do it too, because this is a big ask here. But she also says, if I must die, I must die. She's incredibly good at listening to the wisdom of Mordecai, and that's really special. So on the third day of the fast, Esther puts on her royal robes and she enters the inner court of the palace, just across from the king's hall, and the king is sitting on the royal throne facing the entrance. When he saw Queen Esther standing there in the inner court, he welcomed her and held out his golden scepter to her. That's his that's his invitation to come directly in front of him. And so Esther approached and touched the end of the scepter. And the king asked her, "What do you want, Queen Esther? What is your request? I will give it to you even if it is half of my kingdom." He is so impressed with her courage to come in front of him. He's curious. He knows, he's very aware that his queen here just risked her life to come before him. And of course he wants to know, what do you want? And clarifying his devotion for her, "I will give you anything you ask me for, up to half my kingdom, because of your courage and because of how much I adore you, and that you were clearly in deep want of something, that you came to me in this manner." That's what's happening in between the lines, friends. We're on verse 4, and we're going to keep reading. And Esther replied, "If it pleases the king, let the king and Haman come today for a banquet that I have prepared." And the king turned to his attendants and said, "Tell Haman to come quickly to the banquet as Esther has requested." So the king and Haman went to Esther's banquet. And while they were drinking wine, the king said to Esther, "Now tell me what you really want. What is your request? And I will give it to you, up to half the kingdom." See, he knew that she didn't just risk all the things so that they could have dinner together. But once they were alone, relatively, because Haman's there too, but once they were in a more private setting, he was like, "What is it that you really want?" And so Esther asks him again, "If I've been pleasing to you, I want you to come to a banquet again tomorrow. I'm going to skip around a little bit." And he is like, "Okay, we'll do that." But he's like, something is up though. Obviously she just doesn't want 2 dinners, but she still needs to work up the courage to ask. And it's good and it's wise, because honestly, I don't understand this either. I don't know why she didn't just say it then. I don't know if she was still working on the courage. I don't know if the wisdom of the Holy Spirit was coming on her, telling her, "No, you need to wait one more day because something else important is about to happen." And so, but he agrees. He's like, "Yep, we'll be here tomorrow then. See you then, baby." And so then it jumps over to Haman, though. Then they leave the banquet, and it jumps over to Haman, who is leaving the banquet a happy man. That's what the Bible says. And he goes and has his own party with some of his own friends and officials and all of that. And he brags about his wealth and his family and his position in the kingdom and all the things. But he says, "But it's all worthless." Oh, just showing you what an arrogant and prideful and terrible person Haman is. "It's all worthless because that stupid Mordecai will not bow down to me. All these, I have all this, but it's all nothing. I cannot actually enjoy all the things in my life because of this one guy who is disrespecting me, and it fills me with rage, and I can't get over it." It's literally what he says. He literally says it is all worthless because of Mordecai. And so his wife and his friends recommend that he sets up this poll and goes to the king and tells the king he wants Mordecai gone, and impales Mordecai on this pole. It's a cruel thing that they did back in those days. And so Haman says, "That's a good idea. I'm going to go to the king tomorrow, as a matter of fact. However, the Lord is always working." And that's why I said it doesn't even have to mention him. We can see his hand everywhere, because that night the king is having trouble sleeping. And so he can't sleep. He's very restless. And so he calls for one of his servants to go and get this book and read from this book, the king's book of history, and read the records to him. And that's just going to help lull him to sleep. That's the concept here. And so in reading, while the page here is reading the book to him and reading these stories, they get to the story of Mordecai and how Mordecai had warned about the assassination attempt and therefore saved the king's life. And the king stops. Xerxes stops and he says, "Wait a minute, what was ever done for that guy that saved my life?" Because the guy just keeps reading. He says, whoa, what did we do to reward someone who saved my life? And the page is like, "Oh, well, nothing has been done for him." And the king is very distraught over, "What do you mean nothing's been done for him? Like, what?" And just then he sees a man in the outer court, And he calls for him to come in, and it's Haman. And Haman is there to make this request that he hasn't gotten to say yet. And the king says, this is such a good story. You got to read it, the whole thing for yourself. And the king says, what would you do, Haman? What would you do for someone who has really honored me, for somebody I really respect and I want to honor before the entire kingdom? What would you do? What suggestion do you have? Because remember, I told you, Xerxes is not a deep thinker. He's always going to other people for advice. And so in any case, Haman is immediately thinking, oh, well, who would the king want to honor more than me? I'm the most important guy, so he must be asking me what I would want and how I would want to be honored. And so, okay. And so then Haman comes up with this whole thing about putting the king's robes on him and trotting him around with the king's horses and telling everybody in the kingdom to bow down to him and say, this is who the king honors and this is how the king treats people he honors and blah, blah. And, and this is so funny. The Bible's so fun. And the king says, very well, great. You go get Mordecai and do everything you just suggested for him. Do everything that you just suggested for Mordecai, because that's who I want to honor. Now, mind you, that Haman was on his way to ask the king to have Mordecai executed because he can't stand him. Meanwhile, he just gave him this perfect formula, like the deep desire of Haman's own heart, clearly, of how to be honored. And the king is now going to honor him in that way. You have to love the irony of this. I do. I think it's great. And I think it shows such an important thing of like, there is no coincidence, right? Like the Lord was orchestrating this entire thing and he's got to be laughing, right? Like this is funny. This is just downright funny that this Haman thinks he's going to go and have this guy killed. Meanwhile, the king basically is like, oh, well, that's how you're going to go honor your biggest enemy. Go have at it. And so obviously Haman cannot continue the conversation and be like, well, Mordecai's actually, I don't like him and we need to put it in. Like, obviously he realizes that's off the table now. And so then he is humiliated because he does actually have to follow the king's command. And he does, do all the things, give Mordecai the robe and puts him on the horses and trots him around town. And the whole time, right, the devil's on his shoulder and he's already a bad man and he's just getting more and more enraged the entire time because that is next level humiliation. Everyone at this point, people are chatty, talking. They don't have televisions. All they do is have gossip and the grapevine, right? So people know, right? And they're talking about this for sure. Like there's no doubt in my mind that the people of the land were very familiar with the animosity between Haman and Mordecai, and seeing this play out had to be a next level humiliation. So in any case, this makes Haman obviously even more angry and more apt for this annihilation of the entire Jewish people. And while he's stewing about that, he's also got to get ready to come to the second night of the banquet. And so he's like, I'm just going to go get ready and go to the queen's banquet and I'm so special and blah, blah, blah. And he shows up, goes, does the whole thing again. And again, the king asks Esther, what is it that you really want? I'll give you anything up to half of my kingdom. And Esther is ready with her request. So here we are in Esther chapter 7, and we're going to start with verse 3. Queen Esther replied, if I have found favor with the king, and if it pleases the king to grant my request, I ask that my life and the lives of my people be spared. Remember, he just keeps saying to her, I'll give you anything up to half my kingdom. Oh, I just adore you so much. You're my queen. What can I do for you? And she just asks that you spare her life. Think about this. Think about how enraged the king is about to be right here, because obviously he's willing to give her half his kingdom. And now she's just asking for her life to be spared. Who in the world would dare threaten the life of my queen? He's going to be flipping out in a minute. On verse 4, for my people and I have been sold to those who would kill, slaughter, and annihilate us. If we had merely been sold as slaves, I could remain quiet, for that would be too trivial a matter to warrant disturbing the king. Who would do such a thing?" Xerxes demanded. "Who would be so presumptuous as to touch you?" He is immediately infuriated. And Esther replied, I just can picture this scene, right? There's only two of them at dinner right now. And Esther replied, "This wicked man, Haman, is our adversary and our enemy." Oh, that's so funny. Haman grew pale with fright before the king and queen, and the king jumped to his feet in rage and went out into the palace garden like he is so mad he's got to take a breath. He had to leave the room because he is about to lose his mind. Haman, however, stayed behind and pleaded for his life with Queen Esther, for he knew that the king had intended to kill him. In despair, he fell on the couch where Esther was reclining. Just as the king was returning from the palace, he sees this scene, and it looks like, maybe he's trying to hurt Esther or something. The king, again, not a deep thinker, he just immediately assumes, and so we're going to keep reading. The king exclaimed, "Will he even assault the queen right here in the palace before my very eyes?" As soon as the king spoke, his attendants covered Haman's face, signaling his doom. And then one of the king's eunuchs told him that Haman had set up a sharpened pole that stands 75 feet tall in his very own courtyard that he intended to use and to impale Mordecai, the man who had saved the king from assassination. And again, you're adding fuel to the already intense fire. And he has Haman impaled upon it instead. And then the king's anger had subsided. That's what it says, because he was furious. On that same day, King Xerxes gave the property of Haman, the enemy of the Jews, to Queen Esther. And then Esther puts Mordecai. I'm going to keep reading. I'm going to just keep paraphrasing here because we're running low on time. But you should see how fun it is, friends. This is the story that's really a good read, like fun to read. The story of Esther. There's so much going on there. But Esther then puts Mordecai over Haman's entire estate, and he's in charge of that. And then the king elevates Mordecai to this, basically to the place where Haman was. And then they come to him and they're like, "You got to undo this. You got to undo this decree to all the land that on March 7th, now that's the date we have, but like I said, the date shifts around because our calendars don't line up. But on this specific date is supposed to be this annihilation of the Jewish people, and you've got to undo it." And the king's like, "I can't undo what I've already done. Like, you can't, there's no takebacks, but you can write something, you can add something to it." So he gives Mordecai his signet ring, which is his auto pen basically, and he says, "Make any decree that's going to help you, like figure it out." Like, he puts it in his hands, like, "I can't undo what I've done, but figure out a way to add to it so it won't be as bad." And so they sent out a secondary decree that allows the Jewish people to fight back, and that anyone that they annihilate, then they get their stuff. And so it becomes this whole thing. And when the day arrives, people don't even, when that assigned date of annihilation kind of thing, people don't even go to fight the Jews. They're like, we do not want to do this. We have heard the stories. The Bible even tells us many converted to be Jewish because they were afraid of the Jewish people, because they had heard the stories. They knew the God of the Jews and how they were always saved and always spared. They knew the tales of history, the legends that they'd heard of the parting of the Red Sea and escaping Egypt and the battles of Jericho, and just all the things, just all the stories that would have just been kept being retold. And they were seeing this play out of how God had clearly come to the rescue of the Jews yet again. And they decided, no, we are not going to fight. However, the Jews still had many enemies who were still seeking to cause harm to them. And so now the Jewish people were allowed to fight those people on those days. It was actually 2 days according to Scripture. And so then the third day is the day of rest and celebration. And so they were able to actually instead annihilate some of their enemies that sought to continually cause them harm. And then as a result, they were able to take their spoils. But it does say that they did not take anything from that. They were like, no, the objective here is just to stop the people who are constantly out to harm us and to destroy us. And then they had this feast and this celebration, and that is called Purim, which is named after the rolling of the dice thing that they did to pick the exact date. So that's where we get the name. But in any case, it is meant to commemorate and honor Esther. Esther, who had a hard knock life, who had circumstances, things happened to her, but she never made it her whole story. She was never played a victim. She never whined about it. She clearly walked in beauty and grace and wisdom and won the favor of all the people around her. She stood out in a crowd. She had extraordinary faith and understanding of God and the Spirit because she asked for everyone to go into fasting and prayer, because she had courage and was willing to make the sacrifice. If I must die, then I must die. But we are all going to gather and pray before I do this task. We are all seeking the will and wisdom of God together. She was able to influence her people to agree and do that with her and have the respect and the love from the people to do that. And then be the queen they needed, who actually did have the favor of the king, who actually could ask for something so incredible. And her own family was blessed as a result, because then Mordecai was put in charge of all of this wealth. Haman was a very wealthy man. It goes on about all that. There's several details that I could not get to in the story today. As I keep saying, girl, read your Bible for yourself. Entire book of Esther. It's not going to take you that long. Lots of good details. But I want you to always focus and remember the scripture, because I got to tell you something, friends. And I should have started this, because some of you have not hung in here to the end. So if you are still listening, kudos to you, because you are about to learn something very valuable that I wish I'd have started with. In any case, I've heard it said incorrectly many times that you are not big enough to mess up God's will for your life. And I wish that were true, but it is not. There are people all over this world who have chosen not to follow the things that they knew they were supposed to do. There are many times in my own life that I 100% know I was outside of the will of God. I missed what I was supposed to do. I did not do the thing I was supposed to do. I chose the wrong business. I chose the wrong path. I 100% know. Luckily, I serve the God of the backup plan. And so there's another dice. So he's okay. He's like, okay, well, you didn't do that. Somebody else, I'm going to have to get to do that. That was for you. And I was going to bless you accordingly, but you didn't do it. So this person's going to have to take care of this now, because it's something that still needs to be accomplished. And I'm still going to make good with the mess you just made. We're going to clean it up, and we're going to make it work. And then I'm going to give you another opportunity and another opportunity and another opportunity, because that is also the God I serve. But don't kid yourself, friends. You can totally miss. You can totally just sit around on your couch and decide to do absolutely nothing. You can do that. And that's not God's will for your life. You have choices. You absolutely have choices. And you can choose not to follow the direction. And like Mordecai explained to Esther, if you remain silent at this time, salvation for God's people will come from another source, but you and your family will not be blessed. That's something to really cling to when you're making decisions about following something you feel like you should and being afraid to do so. I know I do. I cling to this story. I replay it over and over. I find courage and strength to take another step, to try again, to do a thing I don't necessarily feel equipped to do, or don't necessarily feel confident in, or feels a little scary. This was scary for Esther. But look how God used her. Look at her incredible story. Look at her claim to fame, getting her whole own entire book of the Bible, because she listened. Because she was made queen for such a time as this. Who knows that everything that's happened to you in your life has put you in this place in this time for this reason and purpose, for this to be your path, for you to do this thing. And that was how it played out. Played out beautifully for everyone. She was saved. Everyone was saved. Everything was good. Haman was put out of the picture because he was a bad guy. Good things happened because Esther found her faith, found her courage, found her confidence. She took her strength from the Lord. She followed the spiritual examples. I think the fact that they fasted and prayed for 3 days beforehand and she called everyone around her to do the same. Man, there's so much we can get out of just that, right? She called everyone around her to join her in seeking the will of God, because that's what the fast and prayer is. Without even having to mention God's name in the entire book, we can continually see his hand and his people honoring his word and his laws over and over. Such a good story. I absolutely love the book of Esther. Obviously, you can tell. I hope you enjoyed learning about her story, especially in this significant time, being that we are literally this week in the Feast of Purim, remembering and recalling this incredible story and how the Jews were saved in the land of Persia in the day of Esther. I hope you had a great time going over this story, friends. I know I did, and I expect and believe that you will read the entire book of Esther for yourself this week. It's a great story. Until next time, girl, read your Bible.